Today I want to talk about Once Burned and its sequel, Twice Tempted by Jeaniene Frost. These books were sent to me by viewer coded Gold, so thank you, Goldie, for sending them. Once Burned and Twice Tempted are vampire carny romance books, and yes, they are as ridiculous as it sounds, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. They are the old school bodice ripper style romance with a heavy erotic content, so they are definitely for adults. The story follows Layla, who was hit by a downed power line when she was 14, and ever since then, her body has become a conduit for unwanted bursts of electrical energy, which makes using things like electronics or physical contact with other human beings an impossibility. It's also made her kind of psychic, so she can touch things and pick up images of the people who used them or how they were used before. She can also do this with people, but only if she's okay with hurting them. After being kidnapped by a big, bad puppet master and 4 of his vampire cronies, who all want to use Layla to track down this puppet master's enemies, Layla inadvertently uses one of the objects they give her to connect to, you guessed it, Vlad the Impaler, known to the rest of the world as Dracula, and yes, it is that ridiculous, and yes, because it is that ridiculous, it is so much fun. Before we get going too much further, the next few minutes will have spoilers, so if you want to skip any spoiler information and just get to the recap, I'll make sure that I link all of that down in the description. And of course I have to do the YouTube thing and request that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Things like that really help me out, so if you've taken the time to do it already, thank you very much. Okay, so Layla the Electric Psychic is kidnapped by these 4 vampires who are trying to use her psychic abilities to track Vlad Dracula through objects that they've taken from bodies from people he's killed. What they don't know is that that winds up being a two-way street. Layla connects to Vlad, and Vlad basically opens his eyes and looks at her and is like, "Who are you?" So the pair of them work out this plan in Layla's mind where he can whisk in, he's in Romania, by the way, and she's in the US, so he has to come from Romania, but he can fly, so it's fine. So he whisks in and saves her from these 4 vampires that are threatening to kill her. She doesn't do what they want. And 2 birds, 1 stone sort of situation. Vlad takes out some of his enemies, and Layla gets saved. The problem is, she gets saved by one of the most dangerous vampires in the world, and he's not about to let her go now that he's discovered what she can do. So he packs her up on a plane and takes her home with him to Romania. He also takes her buddy Marty, who is a dwarf vampire carny it was part of her act, and Marty realized that she was kidnapped and tracked her down, but 4 vampires was too much for Marty to take on, so he was sort of like waiting in a bush to rescue her, and then when Vlad burst in and took her, Marty thought that Vlad was part of this kidnapping scheme and attacked Vlad. So now Marty's attacked Vlad, and Vlad of course takes that as a personal slight, so he takes Marty with them too, and Layla rides to Romania in a private jet, while Marty rides to Romania in a torture box, and this is where we learn that Layla has the street savviness of a boiled turnip, and it is one of only many occasions where Vlad lies to her or manipulates words, and makes a promise not to do something, but is very particular in the language that he uses, and sort of like tricks her or loopholes her into him being able to do what he wants anyway. But of course this is a bodice ripper romance, so it's okay because Vlad's really, really hot, and bonus points, he's completely aware of it, so that makes him even hotter. So they get back to Romania, and Vlad's just sort of doing the, distant protector thing, except for he keeps having dinner with her and finding reasons to come and see her and spend time with her and talk to her. And Vlad is convinced that Layla is going to jump into bed with him at her earliest opportunity, and she was totally on board with that until he said it out loud, and then in some show of feminine defiance or feminine empowerment, she decides that no, she's not going to sleep with Vlad. She's going to go for his bodyguard, Maximus, instead. And Vlad, because he finds this all very amusing, gives them permission to date. So Max takes Layla on a couple dates, and although he is a 6'6" Viking who is also one of the original Knights Templar and also one of the nicest vampires in the entire world, Layla's not attracted to Max, so, she lets him down easy by making out with his boss. It's around this time that we realize that Layla's powers are slowly killing her, and have been for a few years now, but her stand-in vampire dad and carny buddy Marty has been covertly feeding her his blood. Vampire blood has healing powers, of course, and although Layla didn't know it, Marty was keeping her alive. The problem is, Marty is now working for Vlad, so he's out in the field looking for Vlad's enemies and isn't there with Layla to give her the nom-nom juice, and so Layla starts to die, and Vlad gets really pissed, of course, and gives Layla his blood, which is both super potent and also marks her as his property. Because a paranormal bodice ripper romance is not a paranormal bodice ripper romance until somebody pees on somebody else's leg, either physically or metaphorically. Max, who still has the hots for Layla even though she is not at all interested in him, tells Layla what Vlad's done, and like a rebellious teenager, Layla decides that to get back at him, she's gonna go party down in town with a bunch of Vlad's other human blood bags. So they go dancing in a nightclub, and because of Layla's abilities, she spends the entire time balancing between getting absolutely blasted drunk and trying not to touch anybody lest she accidentally give them a heart attack. Like, literally, she could give them a heart attack just by being in this public place and accidentally bumping into them, so she has to be really careful. But Layla's super pissed, so it makes it okay that she's endangering this whole nightclub full of people. So everybody's in the club, dancing the night away, having a good time, and suddenly, vampire attack. 4 vampires, not the original 4 vampires. These are 4 new vampires. I don't know why the author is obsessed with 4 vampire groups. Anyway, so these 4 new vampires burst through the ceiling and start killing a bunch of people, and they are trying to get to Layla. They are led by a baby-faced, silver-haired vampire that looks like, I kid you not, Anderson Cooper. So Andy and his buddies kill a bunch of people, and Layla also kills somebody on accident because she bumps into a girl who's running away and electrocutes her, and she falls on the floor and gets trampled to death. But don't worry about that. We don't need to feel guilty about that for more than about 5 minutes. And bad guy Andy Vampire breaks Layla's legs so she can't run away while he deals with her body cards, and Layla drags herself to a coat closet and then rubs her lips where Vlad kissed her, because that's where he's imprinted his essence on her, and telepathically connects to him, and of course Vlad swoops in and saves the day. So Vlad rescues Layla and gives her his blood to fix her broken legs, and of course Layla is so excited about this that it juices up her libido, and she decides to give Vlad her V-card because of course the 24-year-old with the gymnast's body and the electric skin has never had a chance to touch anyone, much less have an actual boyfriend. And as it turns out, not only does Layla's electricity not hurt Vlad, he actually kind of likes it. Go figure, right? Because Vlad's idea of a enjoyable Saturday night is impaling half a dozen people on the front lawn, and it sounds like I'm joking, but I am not. So after Layla and Vlad do the do, he decides that she's his for real now and moves her up to the bedroom that adjoins his because, you know, easy access. And there's no toilet up there, so she has to like run across the hallway to pee, but that's okay. He could like get her a bucket, but why bother? So while Layla and Vlad are romping naked around Vlad's house, stand-in vampire dad Marty gets kidnapped by the puppet master because he wants to use Marty to convince Layla, basically she's going to psychically connect to Marty, and he knows that she will, and then he wants to torture Marty to like convince Layla to turn on Vlad. And so Vlad's response to this, rather than go find Marty, is to go and get Layla's real dad and her sister and bring them to his castle in Romania for their protection, also known as leverage, because, as we've said, Layla keeps forgetting that she's dating Vlad the Impaler, who has no qualms about using anyone and everyone in whatever means he sees fit to achieve his own ends. So the puppet master still has stand-in vampire dad Marty, and Layla wants to trade herself for him and then use her psychic connection to pull Vlad to her so that he can take this guy out. And Vlad has decided that no, that's not going to happen. One, Layla is too valuable, and he's certainly not going to put a psychic in the hands of his enemies. And two, he actually kind of likes her, even though Layla doesn't believe him, because he never actually says it out loud, and apparently that's the only way that we can tell that people are into us. So he says no, and instead decides to send her with a contingent of bodyguards to a bunch of other vampire nobles' houses in the area, so that she can like touch their stuff and see which of his close allies may have betrayed him, and is feeding information to this puppet master. So while they're investigating one of these houses, the puppet master's cronies, led by the Anderson Cooper lookalike, burst in and kidnap Layla and whisk her off to some stables somewhere in rural Romania. And they are intent on torturing her until she turns on Vlad or admits that she actually is on their side or something like that. And as it turns out, very conveniently, Marty is also there because they intend to use him or torturing him as motivation to make Layla flip on Vlad. What they don't know is that while Layla has been dating Vlad this whole time and messing around with Vlad, he's been having her practice with her electrical powers. So this thing that she's embarrassed about, that she hates, that she feels like she can't control and has been trying to tamp down and hide all this time, he's like, no, this is like your most valuable weapon. This is a tool. You need to use it. And he's been teaching her to sort of harness it out into this crazy electrical whip that she just like starts flipping around and murdering all these vampires. So Layla not only survives 4 almost death blows and then is brought back to life by Anderson Cooper's blood, she also then murders all of the vampires and rescues herself and Marty because we don't need no man. So Layla buries her hands in these dead vampires' bodies and starts like sifting through their memories because, again, she can touch things, she can touch people, she can pull memories off of them. And she discovers that the puppet master is hiding in a secret lair that he's dug under Vlad's old castle that he lived in when he ruled Wallachia, which is what Romania used to be, I guess, or a region of Romania. Anyway, it's a tourist trap now, but the secret layer is underneath, because of course it is. And so she relays that information to Vlad psychically, and meanwhile she and Marty steal Anderson Cooper's car and drive to meet Vlad there. And while he breaks in the front door, Layla and Marty sneak in the back to rescue all of the prisoners that were Layla's bodyguards when she was attacked and kidnapped the 3rd or 4th or 6th time. I can't remember. She gets kidnapped a lot. Of course, the puppet master is already waiting. He's figured out their master plan, even though it wasn't actually a plan. It all just kind of happened on the fly. But never mind. He has set the place to explode. And he tries to kill Layla, hurt Vlad by killing Layla, by blowing her up. And that doesn't work because Vlad has control of fire and coats her in his magical essence. And although he's never used that magic before, it's never been heard of, and nobody is aware that this is a thing that can happen. It is literal plot armor that protects Layla from this explosion. And she and Vlad fly off into the sunset. And that's basically the end of book 1. Book 2 is much of the same, except for there's more explosions and more over-the-top magic. Book 2 also has a little more of the in-world vampire culture, so you get to see a little more of the societal tiers. You get to see a vampire wedding. You get to see what it's like for a new vampire to sort of transition into their new status as undead, and a few other undead creatures that we weren't aware of in book 1. So that's all kind of cool if you're into that, but it's basically more of the same. It's just a follow-up of their love story and sort of letting things blossom and take their course, you know. Okay, so now that we have a basic idea of what happened in the story, let's talk about some things that I liked and some things that I didn't. I'd like to start by talking about some of the inconsistencies in the book. I don't know that I would have noticed them had I not read these books back to back in 2 days. But because that's how I read them, I did notice them. So things like, in book 1, Marty's hair is described as fluffy and brown, and in book 2, it's described as fluffy and black. And that wouldn't bother most people, and to be frank, it didn't bother me, but I did notice. Another thing that wasn't consistent was catchphrases. So a lot of the time when you have a book that has a big named cast, one of the ways that an author will help you identify quickly which character is in the scene and link it back to other scenes in your mind is the character will have a word or a phrase or a manner of speaking that will differentiate them from other characters. And although that device was used frequently in this book when characters were introduced, those phrases and words and tone were not carried through to the other instances where that character showed up. So it was completely ineffective. So things like calling Layla Little Bird when she was kidnapped, it was introduced when she was taken, but then it wasn't carried through. So we weren't able to use that to sort of tie back to those characters, which is kind of a shame. There were also just flat too many named side characters, and I think that that's happened because these books are set in a world that already exists. I believe the author has several other books that are all in this world, and that there's a lot of character overlap, so some of the characters that are in this book also appear in other books, so it's kind of like a cameo appearance, which is great if you're into her books and you're into that world and you understand everything that's going on and how these characters link together. But for me, I've only read these two, and I did kind of find the vast list of named characters overwhelming. So I would have appreciated if there were fewer of them, if maybe we didn't get the names of all the bodyguards and all of the blood bag humans and, you know, all of the kidnappers and all of the, I mean, it was just so many names to try and remember. And fortunately, because the book is so over the top and so ridiculous, it doesn't matter if you forget who people are. But I still would have liked to have been able to retain them, and I wasn't able to because there were too many. Next, I'd like to talk about the prose. The way that language is used in this book is very simple, very straightforward, which makes it really accessible, but it was also super repetitive. We get a lot of repeated descriptions, so a lot of comparisons or descriptions of Vlad's hair and Layla's hair, both of which are black, by the way, of course they are. And Vlad's clothing, and it's all sort of described over and over. We use a lot of color descriptions and texture descriptions repeatedly to sort of help you re-embed yourself in a scene, and although that is effective, the way that she's chosen to describe them is the same every time she does it, rather than altering it a little so it's a little bit different and a little bit new and a little bit more interesting. That sort of thing doesn't really bother me. I did find it a little distracting, but it didn't pull my enjoyment out of the book. But if that sort of simple, less polished writing really bothers you, it might bother you here. Now I'd like to talk about the tropes used in this book. So a lot of certain genres of books, specifically romance books, are marketed by their tropes. So for those of you who read romance based on the tropes that you like, here are some of the ones that I found in this book. Two of the ones that really stuck out to me were the bad guy trope and enemies to lovers. There was also a lot of the typical supernatural sort of you touch her, you die sort of thing, like that's my mate sort of stuff, which you expect with a book like this. I'd also like to note that Layla pushes back on a lot of Vlad's chauvinism, which was kind of refreshing to see. Like, it turns her on, of course, and she likes it, but she also wants to be independent and wants to be able to do things on her own. And I feel like the author gave him room to sort of grow and change and improve over time, and was able to do that in a way that didn't fundamentally change who the character was and didn't detract from his allure as this sort of super powerful, super possessive sort of vampire thing. So I think that was handled really well, but if that over-the-top, chauvinistic, toxic masculinity behavior really bothers you, this probably isn't the book for you. Of course, because this is a romance book, we need to talk about spice, or the level of spice, or level of erotic content. And I feel like when we're talking about those things, there is a difference between spice and smut. To me, spice is when there is touching and kissing, and it's very heated, it's very, sort of steamy, it's erotic, but not explicit. So when things progress to tab A into slot B sort of things, we fade to black. We don't actually go into those descriptions. Smut is when we're actually describing in detail things inserting and moving around and who's touching whom where exactly and what that feels like. And This book is definitely on the smut side rather than the spice side. Just so we're all on the same page, I'm not using smut in a derogatory way. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm clear about what we're describing. So when I say smut, I mean there is actual explicit, detailed sexual information on the page. These books have probably 4 to 6 of those scenes per book. It is certainly not the majority of the content. I would say it's not even the focus or prevalent content in the books, but they're definitely there. So if that is something that bothers you, I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum, but if you are averse to explicit sexual content in books, these may not be for you. And of course, my battery died right here at the end, so we'll just go ahead and finish this up. While these books are over the top and ridiculous, they know it. They never take themselves too seriously. They are a fun, silly little romp through an intentionally over-the-top world, and they never pretend to be more than that. For me, that really worked, and despite some really obvious flaws, I had a lot of fun reading them. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next Tuesday. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and of course if you like the way that I present information, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below. You can find all of my social media contacts in the description, and of course if you want to keep up with me and the progress I'm making on my current novel, you can do that at effywritesbooks.com. Thank you so much for watching, have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.